Everybody, this is Rob Kientz with the Freedom Report. We have a returning guest of the program. It is Stuart Englert, who wrote the book Rigged, talking about the gold manipulation that Gada has covered for many years, as well as he is an independent editor and journalist, has been covering markets for a long time. Stuart, you have a recent article out on your Substack, and I think it also has been reprinted in other places about the gold audit. And I think, given what's going on in the precious metals right now, especially silver and gold, and the prices and the talk about the COMEX and conspiracy theories around do they have the gold and silver, it's a great time to bring you on to talk about your review of the last time we did an audit. And I want just have an interview with that and remind people the last time the U.S. had an audit and what that audit looked like. And because I think right now, Stuart, we don't know how much gold that the U.S. has, and that's a huge topic of concern for everybody out in the market. So welcome to the program, and just get us started. What got you interested in this topic, and what are your findings about gold audits and whether or not the U.S. has the gold?
Sure. Well, good to be with you again, Robert. I started looking at this just a couple of weeks ago after Senator Mike Lee out of Utah introduced some legislation in the U.S. Senate called the Gold Reserve Transparency Act of 2025. And, it got a lot of press in the sound money and gold space. And I said, I want to look at this. What kind of audits have been done in the past? So I got online, did some searches and came up with some original documents from 1953 and 1974. And what I discovered was a lot of the information out there about the last prominent audits were not really true. One of the things that kept coming up about the 1953 audit was that it was comprehensive and independently done.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just, I was amazed as I was reading the document from 1953, which was a U.S. Treasury report, that the audit wasn't comprehensive at all, as far as I'm concerned. During the audit, which was commissioned by the Treasury Secretary at the time, George Humphrey, only 3 of 22 compartments or vaults at the Fort Knox Depository were actually opened and inspected. All the gold bars were counted in those 3, but only a small portion of those bars were actually weighed and assayed. Okay, so I said, well, how can that audit be considered comprehensive or complete when only a small sample of the gold supposedly at Fort Knox was looked at and audited and inspected? And then there was an advisory committee that was appointed by the Treasury Secretary and the previous Treasury Secretary that was supposed to make this audit independent. Okay, and that advisory committee was composed of 3 bankers and a new Federal Reserve governor who had just been recently appointed. And I thought, well, are these people really independent advisors? And if they were worth their salt, would they have recommended that only 13.6% of the gold vaults or compartments had their gold bars inventoried and accounted for? And so I said, it just didn't seem to be a comprehensive, independent audit to me. I think the government could have done a lot better to do a comprehensive audit. And then the next audit that came up was in 1974. And I don't know if you remember, there was a big hullabaloo about that at the time. Media cameras were taken in and reporters, and they opened up one vault and they held bars up to try and, I guess, appease or convince the public that the gold was there. And then there was an actual subsequent physical audit. And once again, interestingly, only 3 gold vaults were opened again in 1974, okay, out of the 13 that supposedly contained gold. And the
Hmm.
reason that there were fewer uh, gold-containing compartments in 1974 is between 1953 audit and the 1974 audit, the United States lost a lot of its gold. It was exported overseas because the United States had trade deficits and balance of payments deficits. So the United States lost a lot of its gold. In 1953, the United States reportedly had about 20,000 uh, tons of metric tons of gold, where that fell to 8,300 tons in 1974. That's quite a reduction in the nation's gold reserves. But anyway, during that 1974 audit, once again, only 3 of 13 compartments were inventoried, and then once again, only a small sampling of the bars in those vaults were weighed and assayed, meaning they took a small sampling from these bars and they tested it for purity. And a lot of those bars came up as only 90% pure, where the exchanges around the world require 95.5 or 99.99% purity
Hmm.
to be exchangeable on the commodity exchanges. So that's
Yeah, it's very
that's what I
interesting.
found.
And yeah, and it's been a long time. We used to talk about this all the time back when my channel was named Gold Silver Pros. We talked about the audits back when I was focused primarily on gold and silver because, we know about, 1971, Nixon taking us off the gold standard and why he did. As you said, there were trade imbalances and we had printed too many dollars. And basically, Europe, among other nations, caught us in the act saying, aha, you're printing too many dollars. So we'll just take those dollars and we'll take your gold. Thank you very much.
Right.
And, that's been, and I think this conversation is so important to bring back to the forefront right now in light of what's going on in the trading markets right now, Stuart. I'm sure you're aware, it's all over social media that there have been some cooling data center issues before there were some cloud issues with Amazon AWS that in which trading data is not coming out on the industrial markets at a time in which it looks like somebody's trying to corner the market. It almost looks like it's Hunt Brothers 2.0, where somebody is standing for uh, in silver hundreds of millions of ounces, maybe billions of ounces, if I read correctly, and at the same time, you have markets like Shanghai, which are reporting higher price. So you have all these signs that the industrial markets are under stress, that there's not enough physical. And so if there is going to be a physical run across the worldwide trading markets, isn't it more important that we know what we have as a national reserve, specifically when China and Russia and the BRICS nations are talking about doing a gold-backed currency, and they're talking about we're talking about how many tons China has. So now it's interesting to see, as we have these problems, that gold's coming back to the forefront, and the question comes right back up: how much gold do we have? And to add color to your argument, when I was an auditor, I did do physical audits, and we might sample if I'm sampling something in a physical audit, it's to risk. So if I'm looking at the risk of something like the nation's gold, I'm going to do a 100% audit. I'm going to make sure every single bar is there, it's accounted for, it's the right purity. And the other thing that I think that they didn't do back then, Stuart, that they probably need to do now is also research whether or not that bar's been resold. Because just because it's sitting in Fort Knox doesn't mean that there's not a lease agreement on it somewhere. And just staring at the gold bar is even not good enough anymore. We got to question whether or not, that bar's been pledged to somebody else by some other contract in some leasing scheme, which we've certainly seen people talk about with SLV and GLD, the ETFs, about how there have been reports out that those have been sold multiple times.
Right.
And then we go back to Daniel Vergara in my report 4 years ago about how the Perth Mint did exactly this and we caught him doing it. So, Stuart, what is your thought on in this day and age? How important is it that we have those gold reserves? How important is it that the U.S. has those? Do you think it's a threat to the dollar, or do you think it puts the U.S. in a bad position? If we didn't have what we said, what's the implications if we don't have the gold? I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, the way I see it, gold and silver, even though they're not, quote, money by law, they
Mhm.
underline uh, and back up, support the entire financial system. And
Mhm.
we've even had central bankers over in Europe confirm that. You know, the Dutch and the Germans have confirmed that when your fiat currency goes south and is worthless, you always can fall back
Mhm.
to gold uh, to reconstitute a new financial system. So I think it's imperative that the United States have the gold and that we confirm that it's not been encumbered. And that's why I like Senator Lee's legislation, is because it not only calls for a comprehensive audit by an independent auditor, you know, appointed by the GAO, but it also uh, the legislation requires that all these swaps and leases that have been done, um, you know, that there's proof that the U.S. gold reserves are not encumbered or owed to other parties.
Mhm.
And to me, that's fundamental because that's how the markets have been rigged. Uh, the gold and silver markets have been rigged over the last, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 decades by using these financial derivatives and swaps and leases to make it appear there's metal there when it was just a trading of imaginary metal, if you will.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word rig, so I got to go back to your book. So you did a book based on this very subject. A lot of it was research from Gada, your own research as well. Putting that into a readable format for people. Talk about what you talked about in rigged and some of the research you came across, about the gold markets and all the things that you found there.
Well, what I found was that the exchanges are not authentic. You know, they have an appearance of trading physical metal, but many of the markets are settled, or many of the trades are settled in dollars and not in actual physical metal. And they do this with these financial derivatives.
Mhm.
And you know, Warren Buffett called them weapons of mass financial destruction or something like that. And I think that's true because they create a facade that there's physical metal in these exchanges, a lot of
Mhm.
it. But what it comes down to is they're just trading these contracts for what is it? Futures contracts for promises of future delivery of metals. And what we're finding out now in London is that they don't have the metals that they say they have, you know, because they've done all the it's called paper trading, but I'm sure most of it is just electronic nowadays. Electronic promises that there's nothing backing it up, and that's a fraud. And that's
Mhm.
what I found in my book. The whole system is a fraud that dupes a lot of people into believing that there's actual physical metal there that can be delivered. And we're finding out that's not the case.
So let's assume that maybe we don't have all the gold. And I've always assumed that because as an auditor, I look at what exactly we're talking about. I looked at Gada's findings, your book, the fact that Trump promised that we were going to go audit the gold reserves, we were going to go right in, and then Besant, seemingly on his own, because that was an interesting little part to this story. Trump made a campaign promise. He came out on Truth Social and even Twitter, I think, and said, we're going to go audit the gold after he was elected. Besant kind of beat him to the punch, and I think it surprised Trump because the way that Trump reacted was like, well, I didn't ask you to do that. He went and showed a gold bar and said it's all here. Well, that's not an audit. It's really a dog and pony show, for being honest. Do you, speculating here, a little bit of speculation, do, what's your feel on whether, it is really there, based on the antics of that? Like, it would seem as though if he made a campaign promise and Trump has been really big about the sovereign wealth fund and revaluing gold and Bitcoin, all this stuff. He wants to reassure people about the financial system. If it were really there, Stuart, wouldn't they have done it a different way? Wouldn't they have gone in and hired a Deloitte or a Bureau of Veritas or somebody like that who's truly independent that's known for doing these types of audits and come in and audit that and posted those results? Don't you think that would have been important for the American people to hear and to reassure them about, the gold that we have supposedly backing up our financial system?
Well, you would think so, but that's where all this secrecy and the failure to conduct a comprehensive independent audit creates all these conspiracies and people wondering what's going on. Uh, and I thought when it became a issue with the president and he was talking about publicly auditing Fort Knox, I thought, oh wow, they've opened the door. It can happen now. They're actually talking about something that's been verboten for so long. And then he went silent, publicly silent on this, and it went nowhere. And I don't know, did Bassett tell him, hey, let's not go there? And why would that be? You know, that's why I think it's imperative that uh, all sound money advocates and gold and silver proponents really call their congresspeople and their senators and insist that Mike Lee and Mr. Massey's legislation go forward and that we get some co-sponsors and get this thing up and going because previous attempts to audit these reserves have failed. Ron Paul tried it back in 2011. He got no sponsors. We had Representative Alex Mooney out of West Virginia also submitted or introduced two pieces of legislation in 2019 and 2021 to have an audit of the nation's gold. And it didn't happen. He couldn't get any sponsors. And that's my biggest concern now. It's one thing for, Trump to come out and say we're going to do it, but the American people have got to awaken to this and force the politicians to do it. Otherwise, they just keep kicking the can down the road, just like the debt can, and nothing ever gets accomplished. So that's my biggest concern is how are we going to get this audit done? How are we going to hold the feet to the fire of the politicians to actually do a comprehensive and independent audit so we can dispel all these conspiracy theories and questions about whether we have 8,000 metric tons of gold?
Yeah. In addition to that, if you look at what people suppose China has, just based on what they don't export, some people are saying, I wrote an article 2 years ago that I thought that they may have 25,000 tons. And I was looking at things like exports, imports. I was looking at shipping manifests. I was looking at the jewelry trade. I know Rhoda Manley's done a big piece at Bullion Vault about this. Some people think they have 30,000 tons. So, and we also know that Russia, to get around oil sanctions in the U.S. a couple of years ago, was basically limiting the downside of their ruble through the oil trade by using gold. And so they've imported a lot of gold. So we know the BRICS nations have a lot of gold. If the United States doesn't have the gold they say they do, this could be potentially catastrophic to the stability of the US dollar. Maybe that's perhaps why they don't really want to say. I do think it's interesting that the US government made silver a critical mineral, and Trump, his administration, is spending $4 billion to not only rebuild silver mining and silver infrastructure in the US, but $1.5 billion of that was to go get what? Silver. So I do think that they know the importance of it. And I think the fact that they're not pressing forward with a public audit really indicates that maybe it's not there or maybe it's leased out. And if we're leasing out the gold in Fort Knox and below the New York Fed, where supposedly most of this sits, then you have to look at the rest of the market, Stuart, and I kind of want to take this out to the rest of the market. What about GLD? What about these ETFs? What about the London OTC market, which is traded on a paper basis? We know that. And which, by the way, holds the gold and the silver for GLD and SLV, at least most of it. What if this entire system is fractional reserved, like the dollar system is? How big of an impact is that going to have when people, wake up one morning and GLD is defaulting because they had leased their gold out, much like Perth Mint did? Like, how much of the world's gold actually exists on a single contract that people actually own? And if not, is the best way for individuals to own it themselves? I mean, because if the US government doesn't have it, the only way we're going to survive the implications of that, because I think that would lead to a dollar crash. How much should people own? Should we be taking our own steps there, given all of this uncertainty around not only sovereign gold in the US, but how much the BRICS are reportedly have, and all of these investment classes people are in, they think that they have it, which probably don't. I mean, the risk in the Western world of not having that is tremendous. So what is the answer for the average everyday person?
Yeah. You know, I truly believe that one of the reasons that gold and silver have been verboten to speak about in political circles is because they do have national and economic security implications. They're very important. And not only they don't want to talk about them or bring attention to gold and silver because they're competitors to the dollar. But there's this other issue that you're bringing up. If this if the gold has been leased out and is not owned by the United States, they don't want to bring any attention to that. But they do, and that's why I think Trump may have gone silent. We don't know why he went silent on the issue,
Yeah.
but that's
He
all
may
I
have been
can.
told, hey, don't talk about it.
Exactly. That's the
Yeah.
only thing I can suspect,
Yeah.
you know, is that he's been told to shut up about it. Um, if if the gold's not there, the dollar is toast, you know? That's the way I see it. We'll have to reformulate a whole new monetary system based on what, you know? Uh, our land? What other resources do we have here in this country that we could reconstitute a viable currency? Uh, you know, it keeps being touted, and Trump even said that. You know, I don't know if you remember this. Back earlier this year, Trump tweeted that those who own the gold make the rules. Okay, well, he was right about that. But what if, as you suggest, the gold is not there, or it's been encumbered, it's been leased out, there are other claims on it? Then the dollar and the U.S. economy and our entire financial system is in a world of hurt. And
Yeah.
that's why we need an audit.
We need a clean audit. We need to know because if, Americans need to prepare. The Chinese are really great. The one thing I'll say about them, not to harp on them too much, but they're really great about telling their people buy the gold. And the gold is not only in sovereign hands in China, but people buy it, not only in jewelry form, but bar
Individuals.
form.
Yeah.
We're not doing that in the US, Stuart. And I'm afraid that if it comes down that we have issues on the industrial markets, if there's a default on COMEX and gold and silver, immediately, immediately people are going to scream to see the US gold reserves because if our industrial markets don't have it, it's been rehypothecated or leased out, and then we don't have it, that could be like a huge threat to the US dollar and the stability of the economic system. And that's really what I'm worried about more than anything, I think.
Right. And sadly and unfortunately, often it takes a major financial economic crisis to wake up the masses and the populace.
Yeah.
But then they're behind the curve. They're caught short-handed because they've been out of the loop because they haven't focused on the economic fundamentals and the financial fundamentals and the monetary system. And
Right.
I know that's what you and a lot of other people in this space have been trying to do is waking up the populace. And I just don't know how to do that. You know, it's like we're talking among ourselves, and we need
Hmm.
to broaden the base here somehow.
Hmm.
And and sadly, I'm afraid that it's going to take a major meltdown of the financial and economic system to wake the majority of the people up.
Yeah, it seems like it kind of happened in 2008, 2009. We had a run, it was on mainstream media, and then it all died down because they came and papered over the system. You had the
Yeah.
most money printing in history at that time, the most amount of debt issuance. The Fed was easing. They were trying to save the system, and everybody kind of everybody went back to normal and forgot, the lessons. They forgot The Big Short, the movie. They forgot the terror of the Lehman crash.
Mhm.
It's like how quickly people forget. But I think that we
Absolutely.
need to continue to bring this top of mind. I agree with you. We need to expand our circle somehow just to get people involved. So what I want to do is I want to show everybody your Substack. So if people go to stuartenglert.substack.com, he's got this article right here that we've been talking about, as well as other articles in the financial system and in the metals. I encourage people to go subscribe to his Substack. He does a really good article at least once a month. Of course, you'll see him printed other places as well. Here's his book, the one that we talked about. This is a really great book written in 2020 that put Gatto's research and this entire debate into a digestible format. So please go visit that and get a copy of his book if you're at all concerned with that. By the way, one way in which we can involve more people in it is to give out a copy of that book and say, here's a book, go through it, be aware, kind of spread the word in that way. So I appreciate your effort, Stuart, on doing that. We'll continue to follow you. Thank you for joining the program, and we'd love to have you back in the future.
Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks for mentioning the book and my Substack. I've been doing what I can, along with GATA and yourself and other people in the precious metal space. But it's a slog to get people
It
to
is.
acknowledge what's going on in our monetary system.
It is, but somehow we got to keep up the fight. So I've got actually an ALEC conference later this afternoon when I'm going to go to. We're going to talk about to state legislators and other market participants about the gold and silver issue. Now, they're not there specifically for gold and silver. It's really a conservative sort of think tank type of deal where conservative leaders come together. But I'm going to bring that to the forefront there. So I'm trying to reach out
Great.
politically to people as well as social media, and just do whatever we can. But we definitely appreciate your efforts. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Rob. Good to see you.
Yep.